The origins of Unforgiven can be traced back to the early 1970s when screenwriter David Webb Peoples crafted a dark, introspective Western that defied the conventions of the genre. Unlike traditional Westerns that glorified gunslingers, duels, and frontier justice, Peoples' screenplay, then titled The William Money Killings, was a grim deconstruction of violence, morality, and the psychological toll of killing. The script followed the story of an aging outlaw, William Money, who had long abandoned his violent past, only to be drawn back into the world of bounty hunting out of financial desperation. At the time, Peoples, who would later co-write Blade Runner, struggled to find a buyer for the script. Hollywood was still deeply entrenched in the traditional heroic cowboy narrative, and studios were reluctant to back a Western that portrayed gunslingers as regretful, haunted men rather than noble heroes. The rise of revisionist Westerns in the 1960s and early 70s, pioneered by filmmakers like Sam Peckinpah and Sergio Leone, had started to challenge the genre, but Peoples' script was considered too bleak, too nihilistic, and too morally ambiguous for its time. It was passed around among various producers but never gained traction. The project might have remained buried in obscurity had it not caught the attention of Clint Eastwood, a man who would eventually redefine the very image of the Western hero. In the early 1980s, Eastwood read the script and was instantly captivated by its raw, unflinching take on violence and its psychological repercussions. He recognized something in William Money that resonated with his own on-screen persona, a former killer trying to live a quiet life, but forever haunted by his past. However, despite his enthusiasm for the project, Eastwood made an unusual decision. He bought the rights to the script but chose to sit on it for years before making the film. This decision was deeply intentional. Eastwood felt that the story's weight, its themes of regret and aging, would be best served if he himself were older when he played Money. At the time, he was still in his early 50s and felt that the character required the presence of an older man, someone whose body was beginning to fail him, whose past felt truly distant yet inescapable. Eastwood also understood that Unforgiven was more than just another Western. It was a reckoning with his own cinematic legacy. By the late 1980s, Eastwood had become synonymous with the stoic, lethal gunslinger archetype, thanks to films like A Fistful of Dollars, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, and The Outlaw Josie Wales. He had built his career playing characters who could kill without hesitation and ride off into the sunset without consequence. But Unforgiven was different. It questioned everything that those earlier films had represented. It asked, what happens to a killer when the killing stops? What is the cost of all the bloodshed? Can redemption ever be real? The film wasn't just a story, it was a deconstruction of the myth Eastwood had helped to create. And so, he waited. Throughout the 1980s, Eastwood focused on other projects, keeping Unforgiven quietly in his back pocket. The decision paid off. By the time he was ready to make the film in the early 1990s, he had aged into the role naturally, bringing the weight of his own career and persona to the character of William Money. This long gestation period allowed the film to mature into something deeper, something more reflective. It was no longer just an opportunity for Eastwood to play an aging outlaw, it was a meditation on violence, heroism, and the passage of time, made by a filmmaker who had lived through the very myths he was now dismantling. Even before production began, Unforgiven was already shaping up to be one of the most personal and significant films of Eastwood's career. The journey from an unproduced script in the 1970s to Eastwood's careful, patient decision to bring it to life decades later laid the foundation for what would become one of the greatest Westerns ever made. When Clint Eastwood finally decided to bring Unforgiven to life in the early 1990s, he approached the project with a clear vision, one that stood in stark contrast to the grand romanticized Westerns of Hollywood's past. Unlike the classic John Ford or Howard Hawks Westerns, which depicted rugged individualism and the triumph of law over chaos, Unforgiven was intended to be a meditation on the true cost of violence. Eastwood was determined to strip away the mythology surrounding gunfighting, painting a world where every kill had consequences, where death was neither clean nor heroic. But before he could get the film off the ground, he faced a series of logistical and creative challenges that would test his patience and resolve. One of the first hurdles was securing studio backing. Despite Eastwood's stature as one of Hollywood's most bankable actors and directors, Unforgiven was a risky project. Westerns had fallen out of favor by the early 1990s, with very few making a significant impact at the box office. The last major Western success had been Dances with Wolves, 1990, which won multiple Academy Awards, but Kevin Costner's film had a more traditional storytelling arc, with clear-cut heroes and villains. Unforgiven, by contrast, was a film where morality was murky, The protagonist was deeply flawed, and the violence was deliberately ugly. Warner Brothers was hesitant at first but ultimately trusted Eastwood's instincts, granting him a budget of approximately $14 million, a modest sum even by early 90s standards. But budget constraints meant Eastwood had to be extremely efficient in pre-production, ensuring that every dollar was spent wisely. With the financing in place, Eastwood turned his attention to assembling the right crew. One of his most crucial hires was cinematographer Jack N. Green, with whom Eastwood had worked on several previous films, including Bird, 1988, and The Bridges of Madison County, 1995. Green understood Eastwood's preference for natural lighting and minimal artificial setups, allowing for a more grounded, atmospheric look that fit Unforgiven's bleak and desolate tone. To further capture the film's somber aesthetic, Eastwood decided against using any modern Western filming locations in the United States. Instead, he chose the Canadian province of Alberta, where the landscape remained largely untouched and offered the kind of rugged, untamed wilderness that the story required. This decision added logistical difficulties, as shooting in remote areas with unpredictable weather conditions meant additional planning and risk. Still, Eastwood was determined to prioritize authenticity over convenience. Another key challenge was ensuring that the town of Big Whiskey, where much of the film's action takes place, felt like a real, lived-in settlement rather than a Hollywood backlit. To achieve this, the entire town was built from scratch in the Alberta countryside, with Eastwood insisting that buildings be constructed with functional interiors rather than mere facades. This attention to detail allowed for greater freedom in cinematography, as Green and his team could shoot from inside the buildings, capturing more naturalistic angles and lighting. It also added an immersive quality for the actors, making the setting feel authentic rather than staged. Another significant hurdle Eastwood faced was shaping the film's overall tone. While People's script was already strong, Eastwood made subtle but crucial adjustments to enhance its thematic weight. One of his most notable contributions was refining the way violence was portrayed. Unlike traditional westerns where shootouts were often stylized and dramatic, Unforgiven would present killing as clumsy, terrifying, and deeply unsettling. This meant instructing his actors to deliver gunfights with hesitation, fear, and regret rather than bravado. In one key moment, the character of the Schofield Kid, who idolizes gunfighters, breaks down after his first kill, sobbing that the man he shot ain't gonna breathe again. Eastwood saw this as a pivotal scene, one that would drive home the idea that killing wasn't a badge of honor, but a heavy burden. Another major concern was the portrayal of William Money. Eastwood wanted Money to be different from his past characters. Less confident, more broken, yet still capable of immense violence when provoked. This required balancing his performance carefully. Money wasn't to be played as a typical anti-hero who secretly relished killing, nor as a man seeking redemption in a conventional way. Instead, Eastwood portrayed him as a man who had tried to leave his past behind, but who had never truly escaped it. The decision to frame Money's violence as something ugly and tragic rather than exhilarating was one of the film's defining choices. As Eastwood put it, Unforgiven wasn't about glorifying vengeance, it was about showing how violence corrupts and dehumanizes. Eastwood also faced creative resistance when it came to the film's pacing. Warner Brothers executives expressed concerns that the movie was too slow, especially in its first half. The opening of the film deliberately took its time, showing Money struggling to take care of his farm, fumbling while trying to mount his horse, and hesitating before re-entering a life of violence. Studio heads worried that audiences would lose interest before the action picked up. But Eastwood refused to compromise. He believed that by taking the time to show Money's struggles, the audience would feel the weight of his choices more profoundly when he finally picked up a gun. He was adamant that the film wasn't meant to be an action spectacle. It was a slow-burning character study, one that needed room to breathe. Despite these challenges, Eastwood remained committed to his vision. Unlike many directors who would endlessly second-guess their choices, he maintained a philosophy of trusting his instincts and working with minimal interference. He had a rule of doing only 1 or 2 takes per scene, believing that over-rehearsing would drain performances of their natural energy. He also made a point of avoiding excessive dialogue, preferring silence and visual storytelling over exposition. Every decision was guided by his belief that Unforgiven was a film about restraint, both in its characters and in its filmmaking style. By the time pre-production wrapped, Eastwood had successfully laid the groundwork for what would become one of the most groundbreaking westerns ever made. The carefully chosen locations, the meticulous attention to detail, and his unwavering dedication to a darker, more thoughtful portrayal of violence all ensured that Unforgiven would stand apart from the westerns of the past. It was not a film made for spectacle, it was made for reflection. And as Eastwood prepared to move into production, he knew that the true test was still ahead. Would his actors and crew bring this vision to life? Would audiences accept a western that so thoroughly deconstructed its own mythology? And most importantly, could Unforgiven succeed in telling a story about the price of violence in a way that felt truthful rather than sensationalized? These were the questions that lingered as filming was set to begin. With pre-production finalized and the groundwork laid for the film's distinct vision, Clint Eastwood turned to one of the most crucial aspects of filmmaking, assembling the perfect cast. Given the weight of the story, the depth of its characters, and the unconventional nature of the script, Unforgiven required actors who could bring authenticity, nuance, and subtlety to their roles. Eastwood had a precise idea of how he wanted each character to be portrayed. Gritty, realistic, and stripped of the theatrics that had often defined Western performances in earlier decades. Every major casting decision had a significant impact on the film, from choosing veteran actors to balancing established talent with fresh faces. But as with many aspects of the film's production, casting was not without its challenges. One of the biggest hurdles was securing Gene Hackman for the role of Little Bill Daggett, the film's complex antagonist. Unlike traditional Western villains, Little Bill wasn't a black hat outlaw or a bloodthirsty gunslinger. He was a sheriff who believed he was maintaining order, yet his brutal enforcement of the law made him arguably more dangerous than any outlaw. Hackman, a seasoned actor with a reputation for playing intense, morally ambiguous characters, seemed like the perfect fit. However, when he was first approached, he was reluctant to take the role. At the time, Hackman had grown weary of violent films and had vowed to distance himself from projects that centered around excessive brutality. He had turned down multiple roles that he felt glorified violence, and he initially viewed Unforgiven as another film that would contribute to that trend. It took Clint Eastwood personally reaching out to Hackman and explaining the film's deeper themes, the deconstruction of violence, the human cost of killing, and the critique of traditional Western tropes, to change his mind. Once Hackman understood that Unforgiven was not about reveling in violence but about condemning it, he agreed to take on the role. His portrayal of Little Bill as a self-righteous, sadistic enforcer, someone who believed in his own moral superiority despite his cruelty, became one of the film's standout performances. Another critical piece of the casting puzzle was the role of Ned Logan, William Money's loyal but reluctant partner. Eastwood knew he needed an actor who could portray both warmth and quiet strength, someone who could stand as Money's conscience while also sharing his complicated past. The role ultimately went to Morgan Freeman, who had worked with Eastwood on Pale Rider, 1985, and had since become one of Hollywood's most respected actors. Freeman's presence added an extra layer of depth to the film. His character, an aging former outlaw who had found peace but was willing to help Money for the sake of loyalty, embodied many of Unforgiven's central themes. His performance was understated yet powerful, and his chemistry with Eastwood was natural, making their friendship feel deeply genuine. One of the most poignant aspects of Freeman's casting was how his character was treated in the film's narrative. Unlike in many westerns where black characters were either absent or relegated to minor roles, Ned Logan was given a significant, fully realized arc. However, his fate, being captured, tortured, and killed by Little Bill, was a stark reminder of the film's brutal realism. Eastwood did not shy away from showing how violence, even when justified, often led to tragic consequences. For the role of English Bob, the charming yet hypocritical gunfighter who masquerades as a nobleman, Eastwood sought out Richard Harris, a legendary British actor known for his commanding presence. English Bob serves as one of the film's clearest examples of how Western mythology distorts reality. He boasts about his heroic exploits but is swiftly beaten and humiliated by Little Bill, revealing him to be nothing more than an opportunist who thrives on fabricated tales of grandeur. Harris's performance was both flamboyant and pitiful, capturing the contradictions of a character who had built his identity on half-truths. His interactions with W. Beecham, the naive writer played by Saul Rubinek, further reinforced the film's critique of how violence was romanticized in Western storytelling. The way English Bob went from being revered to being utterly disgraced mirrored the film's larger deconstruction of heroism, making Harris's role essential to the narrative's themes. A particularly difficult role to cast was that of the Schofield Kid, the young, eager gunslinger who idolizes outlaws and believes that killing will make him a legend. The character needed to be someone who exuded both youthful bravado and deep insecurity, a man who talked big but had never actually faced real violence. Eastwood ultimately chose James Woolvett, a relatively unknown actor at the time. Woolvert's portrayal of the Schofield Kid was pivotal in illustrating Unforgiven's message. He begins the film as a cocky, self-assured wannabe gunslinger, only to be completely shattered after taking a man's life for the first time. His breakdown after killing one of the bounty targets, realizing that he had taken away a life that could never be restored, was one of the film's most haunting moments. This performance underscored one of Unforgiven's most essential points. Killing was not something to be celebrated. The myth of the fearless gunslinger was just that, a myth. Casting the women of Unforgiven was also a critical decision. Frances Fisher took on the role of Strawberry Alice, the fiercely determined prostitute who initiates the bounty on the cowboys responsible for the brutal attack on one of her fellow workers. Her character provided a crucial counterpoint to the male-dominated world of the film, representing a different kind of justice, one that wasn't dictated by lawmen or gunfighters, but by those who had been harmed and left powerless. Anna Thompson played Delilah Fitzgerald, the prostitute who was disfigured at the beginning of the film, and her quiet, subdued performance made her character's suffering feel painfully real. Rather than being a revenge-driven figure, Delilah was portrayed as someone who had suffered senseless cruelty and was left to endure the consequences, reinforcing the film's somber, anti-heroic tone. One of the most unique aspects of Unforgiven's casting process was Eastwood's commitment to ensuring that every role, no matter how small, felt lived in and authentic. Even minor characters, such as the cowboys who were targeted for the bounty or the townspeople who witnessed Little Bill's brutal reign, were played by carefully chosen actors who could contribute to the film's immersive realism. Eastwood was meticulous about avoiding performances that felt too theatrical or exaggerated. He wanted Unforgiven to feel grounded, to strip away the pageantry that often accompanied westerns. He encouraged improvisation in certain scenes, allowing the actors to react naturally rather than delivering overly rehearsed performances. By the time the cast was fully assembled, Eastwood had created an ensemble that perfectly embodied the film's themes of regret, violence, and the deconstruction of Western mythology. Each actor brought something vital to the table, and their performances would go on to be some of the most memorable of their careers. With the cast in place, filming was ready to begin. However, bringing Unforgiven to life on set would be its own monumental challenge, one that would require patience, adaptability, and a willingness to embrace the film's harsh realities. With the cast assembled and pre-production complete, Clint Eastwood moved into the most demanding phase of bringing Unforgiven to life: filming. Unlike many directors who favored controlled studio environments, Eastwood insisted on shooting the film on location, embracing the harsh realities of the landscape to add authenticity to the story. This meant taking the production to the Canadian province of Alberta, a decision that would prove both rewarding and challenging. Shooting in remote areas brought logistical difficulties, including unpredictable weather, rough terrain, and the absence of modern infrastructure. However, Eastwood believed that the unspoiled wilderness of Alberta provided the perfect backdrop for the bleak, unforgiving world he wanted to depict. The location's vast, desolate plains and overcast skies visually reinforced the film's somber themes. This was not a western of golden sunsets and wide, hopeful vistas. It was a story about the weight of the past, set against an environment that felt just as harsh as the characters' lives. One of the most critical elements of filming was the creation of Big Whiskey, the town where much of the action unfolds. Unlike many Hollywood westerns, which used pre-built sets on studio lots, Eastwood ordered that the town be constructed from scratch, with every building having a fully functional interior. This decision allowed the cinematography to feel more organic, as cameras could capture shots from inside structures rather than relying on artificial facades. The design of Big Whiskey was deliberately modest. No grandiose saloons, no overly elaborate storefronts, just a simple, muddy town where violence was a fact of life. The town's layout also played a crucial role in the film's visual storytelling. The streets were narrow and confining, making shootouts feel claustrophobic rather than cinematic. The sheriff's office, where Little Bill exerted his brutal authority, was positioned prominently, serving as a constant reminder of his presence. Even small details, such as the wooden walkways and the dimly lit interiors of the saloon, were carefully designed to evoke a sense of gritty realism. Filming in Alberta came with its own set of obstacles. The unpredictable weather was a constant issue. One day, the crew would be battling rain and mud, and the next, they would be dealing with harsh winds and freezing temperatures. This required the actors and crew to be highly adaptable, as scenes sometimes had to be rescheduled or adjusted based on the conditions. Despite these difficulties, Eastwood maintained his characteristic efficiency. Known for his one-take approach, he avoided unnecessary retakes, believing that excessive repetition drained performances of their natural energy. This philosophy kept production moving swiftly, ensuring that delays due to weather or location challenges were kept to a minimum. Eastwood's directorial style on set was markedly different from many Hollywood directors. He cultivated a quiet, disciplined atmosphere, avoiding excessive direction and allowing actors to bring their own interpretations to their roles. Unlike some directors who would call action in a booming voice, Eastwood would simply say, "Whenever you're ready," allowing scenes to begin in a more natural, fluid manner. He also discouraged the use of storyboards, preferring to let the cinematography evolve organically based on the actor's movements and the setting. This approach gave Unforgiven its distinct, unforced rhythm, making every interaction and exchange feel lived in rather than choreographed. Perhaps the most crucial aspect of filming was the portrayal of violence. Unlike traditional westerns, where shootouts were often stylized and fast-paced, Unforgiven presented gunfights as chaotic, awkward, and terrifying. To achieve this, Eastwood instructed his actors to approach violence with hesitation rather than bravado. The Schofield kid's killing of an unarmed man was filmed with deliberate unease. His shaking hands, his panicked breathing, and his immediate regret all emphasized the reality of taking a life. Similarly, the climactic gunfight in the saloon, where William Money unleashes his fury on Little Bill and his men, was filmed in a way that felt almost anti-heroic. Rather than a triumphant moment, it was a massacre carried out by a man who had lost everything. The film's lighting and cinematography also played a crucial role in shaping its unique tone. Jack N. Green, the cinematographer, used natural light whenever possible, avoiding the polished, glamorous look of classic Hollywood westerns. Many scenes were shot in dim lighting, with shadows cast across characters' faces to reflect their moral ambiguity. The rain-drenched climax, where Money confronts the townspeople, was filmed with a muted color palette, emphasizing the cold, unrelenting nature of the moment. Even the use of candlelight in interior scenes was carefully controlled, creating a sense of intimacy while also reinforcing the film's darker themes. One of the most striking choices Eastwood made was the decision to avoid using a traditional orchestral score during action sequences. Instead, the film relied heavily on ambient sounds, the creak of wooden floors, the distant howl of the wind, the muffled conversations of townsfolk. This absence of grand musical cues made the violence feel more unsettling. There was no swelling music to glorify or justify the killings. The only real musical theme in the film, composed by Eastwood himself, was a quiet, melancholic guitar piece that underscored the film's reflective tone. Filming Unforgiven was not without its tense moments. Gene Hackman, known for his intense performances, sometimes clashed with Eastwood over certain scenes, particularly those involving his character's brutality. Hackman wanted to explore more layers to Little Bill's personality, while Eastwood insisted on maintaining his cold, authoritarian presence. Despite these minor disagreements, the mutual respect between the two professionals ensured that their collaboration remained productive. Morgan Freeman, ever the steady presence, brought a calming influence to the set, often mentoring younger actors and helping maintain morale during difficult shoots. By the time filming wrapped, Eastwood had accomplished what he had set out to do. He had created a Western that was entirely different from anything that had come before, a film that stripped away the genre's myths and forced audiences to confront the consequences of violence. There were no clear heroes, no easy moral victories, only flawed men trying to navigate a world that offered no forgiveness. Unforgiven was not a celebration of the Old West, it was an elegy for it. As the footage was reviewed in post-production, it became clear that Unforgiven was something special. The performances were raw and authentic, the cinematography was hauntingly beautiful, and the film's slow-burning intensity made every moment feel meaningful. However, there was still work to be done. The next stage, editing, scoring, and finalizing the film structure, would determine whether Unforgiven could truly achieve its vision. Would it resonate with audiences? Would it stand out in an era where Westerns were seen as outdated? These were the final questions that Eastwood and his team would have to answer in the final stages of bringing Unforgiven to the world. With filming complete, Clint Eastwood moved into post-production, the final and most crucial stage in shaping Unforgiven into a masterpiece. While the performances, cinematography, and raw footage had captured the depth and brutality of the story, it was in the editing room that the film would take its final form. This phase was about refining the pacing, enhancing the emotional weight of key moments, and ensuring that the film's understated yet powerful themes resonated fully. Unlike many directors who involve themselves in every minor detail of editing, Eastwood had a long-standing reputation for efficiency. He trusted his longtime editor, Joel Cox, to shape the film while only stepping in when necessary. Cox, who had worked with Eastwood on multiple projects, understood the director's minimalist approach and ensured that every cut served the film's grounded, anti-mythological vision. One of the most significant editing decisions was how to handle Unforgiven's deliberately slow, contemplative pacing. In contrast to most westerns, which thrived on dramatic shootouts and fast-paced storytelling, Unforgiven was a film of quiet moments, building tension through silence rather than action. Eastwood and Cox chose to let certain shots linger longer than conventional wisdom dictated. Whether it was William Money sitting alone, lost in thought, or the eerie, still presence of the town of Big Whiskey before violence erupted. This editing choice reinforced the film's themes, making the audience feel the weight of every decision, every kill, and every moment of hesitation. The emotional impact of these quiet, drawn-out sequences was profound, allowing the audience to reflect on the film's moral ambiguity rather than simply moving from one scene to the next. One of the key aspects of post-production was the sound design. Given that Unforgiven was about stripping away the romanticism of the Western genre, Eastwood wanted the sound to be as immersive and naturalistic as possible. Unlike many action-driven westerns that emphasize the sound of gunfire with exaggerated effects, Unforgiven portrayed shootouts in a raw, unsettling manner. Gunshots echoed harshly, leaving a chilling silence afterward rather than being buried under dramatic music. The sounds of the town, rain hitting wooden planks, horses shifting in the mud, the creak of doors and floorboards, were carefully mixed to create an oppressive, atmospheric tension. Every auditory detail served a purpose, enhancing the realism of the world without drawing attention to itself. Perhaps the most subtle yet crucial element of post-production was the film score, which was composed by Eastwood himself. Unlike traditional westerns, which often featured sweeping orchestral scores that romanticized the frontier, Unforgiven was defined by its sparse, melancholic musical choices. The main theme, a simple yet haunting guitar piece known as Claudia's Theme, was named after William Money's deceased wife, whose memory looms over the entire film. The melody was quiet and reflective, appearing at key moments to underscore Money's internal struggle. Eastwood's choice to compose the score himself was a deeply personal one. Music had always been a passion of his, and he understood that a heavy-handed score would have undermined the film's emotional restraint. Instead, the minimalistic approach allowed silence and ambient sound to do most of the storytelling, with the music subtly reinforcing the film's underlying sadness. One of the most crucial post-production decisions involved the film's ending. The final sequence, where William Money exacts revenge on Little Bill and his deputies before riding off into the darkness, was one of the most powerful moments in the film. Eastwood and Cox made the decision to hold the final shot of Money disappearing into the rain for an extended moment, allowing the audience to sit with the weight of what they had just witnessed. Instead of ending on a triumphant note, the film closed with a sense of unease. Money had avenged his friend, but at what cost? He had returned to violence, becoming the ruthless killer he had spent years trying to leave behind. This final image of Money, now fully transformed into the myth he had tried to escape, was one of the most haunting conclusions in modern cinema. Another important element of post-production was shaping the film's opening and closing text cards. Unforgiven begins with a simple, poetic text crawl that sets the stage for the story, explaining how William Money had once been a feared outlaw but had settled down to live a quiet life after marrying a woman who saw goodness in him. The closing text, which hints at Money's possible fate, either disappearing into anonymity or finding success elsewhere, was deliberately ambiguous, reinforcing the film's refusal to offer easy answers. These text cards framed the film as a legend being passed down through history, further emphasizing its deconstruction of Western mythology. As Unforgiven neared completion, the final hurdle was marketing the film. Westerns were no longer a dominant genre in Hollywood, and there was concern that audiences might not be drawn to a revisionist, meditative take on the genre. Warner Brothers was initially unsure how to position the film. Should it be marketed as a classic Clint Eastwood gunslinger movie, or should it be sold as something more introspective and unconventional? Eastwood, however, was firm in his belief that the film should not be misrepresented. He wanted audiences to know that Unforgiven was not an action-packed spectacle, but rather a story about the consequences of violence and the myths surrounding the Old West. The film's poster, featuring Eastwood's silhouette with his gun held behind his back, perfectly captured this theme. This was not a movie about glory, but about the shadow that violence casts over a man's soul. The final cut of Unforgiven was screened for select audiences before its release, and the initial reactions were overwhelmingly positive. Critics and industry insiders recognized that Eastwood had created something truly special, a film that not only stood as a great Western but also as a profound meditation on violence, justice, and redemption. The film was completed with a final runtime of 131 minutes, a length that allowed it to fully explore its themes without overstaying its welcome. With the editing, score, and final touches completed, Unforgiven was ready for release. However, the question remained, would audiences embrace this darker, more reflective take on the Western? Would the film find success in an era where Westerns had largely faded from mainstream popularity? And most importantly, would Unforgiven be recognized as the genre-defining work that Eastwood had envisioned? The answers would soon be revealed, as Unforgiven prepared to make its debut in theaters, setting the stage for its impact on film history. When Unforgiven was released in theaters on August 7, 1992, no one could have predicted just how monumental its impact would be. Westerns, once a dominant Hollywood genre, had been largely abandoned by the early 1990s, with only a few films, like Dances with Wolves, 1990, managing to make a cultural dent. Many assumed that Unforgiven would be a modest success, appreciated by Eastwood's loyal fanbase but unlikely to leave a lasting impression beyond that. However, as audiences and critics began to digest the film, it became clear that Unforgiven was far more than just another Western. It was a powerful, genre-defining work that would stand as one of the most important films of its time. Box office performance and audience reception. Despite initial concerns about the marketability of a revisionist Western, Unforgiven performed exceptionally well at the box office. The film opened strong, bringing in over $15 million in its first weekend, and went on to gross over $159 million worldwide against a modest $14 million budget. This success proved that there was still a place for Westerns in modern cinema, but more importantly, it demonstrated that audiences were hungry for stories that challenged traditional narratives rather than reinforcing them. The film resonated not just with longtime Western fans, but also with a broader audience who connected with its themes of regret, violence, and morality. Word of mouth played a significant role in Unforgiven's success. Many viewers left the theater deeply moved, grappling with the film's complex portrayal of justice and vengeance. Unlike most Westerns, which left audiences feeling exhilarated by the exploits of their gunslinging protagonists, Unforgiven left them in a state of reflection. William Money's transformation from a broken, reluctant farmer to a ruthless killer was not a triumphant return to his old ways. It was a tragic inevitability, a commentary on how violence corrupts even those who try to escape it. This emotional weight made the film stand apart, turning it into a must-see cinematic experience. Critical acclaim and Academy Awards success. From the moment critics began reviewing Unforgiven, it became clear that Eastwood had created something truly remarkable. Roger Ebert, one of the most respected film critics of all time, gave the film a perfect 4-star rating, calling it a great Western, a great film, by one of the best directors working today. Ebert praised Eastwood's ability to deconstruct the mythology of the Western while still making a deeply engaging and emotionally powerful film. Other critics echoed similar sentiments, noting that Unforgiven was a rare example of a film that honored the traditions of its genre while simultaneously dismantling them. The film's reputation only grew stronger as it entered the awards circuit. At the 65th Academy Awards in 1993, Unforgiven received 9 Oscar nominations and won 4 of the most prestigious categories. Best Picture, cementing its place as the defining film of the year. Best Director, Clint Eastwood, a recognition of Eastwood's masterful handling of the film's themes and storytelling. Best Supporting Actor, Gene Hackman, a testament to Hackman's chilling and layered performance as Little Bill Daggett. Best Film Editing, Joel Cox, a reflection of how carefully crafted the film was in post-production. Eastwood's dual nomination for Best Actor, an award he ultimately lost to Al Pacino for Scent of a Woman, further emphasized his incredible transformation into William Money. The film's other nominations, including Best Cinematography, Jack N. Green, and Best Original Screenplay, David Webb Peoples, highlighted just how universally praised Unforgiven was across all aspects of filmmaking. These wins were significant for multiple reasons. First, it confirmed Eastwood's status as not just a Hollywood legend but also one of the greatest directors of his generation. Up until that point, Eastwood had been seen primarily as an actor-turned-director, respected for his work behind the camera but not necessarily regarded as an auteur. Unforgiven changed that perception, proving that Eastwood was capable of crafting films with deep thematic resonance and artistic excellence. Second, Unforgiven's Oscar wins marked a significant moment for the Western genre. For decades, Westerns had been largely overlooked at the Academy Awards, often seen as pulpy entertainment rather than serious cinema. Unforgiven shattered that notion, reminding the film industry that Westerns could be more than just shootouts and frontier justice. They could be profound explorations of human nature. Cultural impact and influence on the Western genre. Following its release, Unforgiven quickly cemented itself as one of the greatest Westerns ever made. But its true impact lay in how it transformed the genre itself. Before Unforgiven, Westerns often romanticized the myth of the noble gunslinger, perpetuating the idea that violence was sometimes necessary, even honorable. Unforgiven dismantled that myth, presenting a world where violence was ugly, where killers were haunted by their pasts, and where morality was never black and white. This influence can be seen in many of the Westerns that followed. Films like The Proposition, 2005, No Country for Old Men, 2007, and The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, 2007, all carried traces of Unforgiven's DNA, subverting traditional Western tropes and portraying the Old West as a cruel, indifferent place rather than a land of adventure. Even Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, 2012, and The Hateful Eight, 2015, owe a debt to Unforgiven, borrowing from its revisionist spirit while infusing their own stylistic flourishes. Beyond influencing other films, Unforgiven also changed the way audiences viewed Clint Eastwood. For decades, he had been synonymous with the strong, silent Western hero, the ultimate gunslinger who always came out on top. But Unforgiven forced audiences to reconsider that image. William Money wasn't a hero. He was a man burdened by his past, capable of great violence but forever trapped by the consequences of his actions. In many ways, Unforgiven served as Eastwood's farewell to the genre that made him famous, a final, definitive statement on the mythology of the West. A lasting legacy. More than 3 decades after its release, Unforgiven remains one of the most celebrated films in cinema history. It is frequently ranked among the greatest movies ever made, appearing on lists compiled by the American Film Institute, Sight and Sound, and countless critics. It continues to be studied in film schools as a masterclass in direction, storytelling, and deconstructionist filmmaking. Eastwood himself has reflected on Unforgiven as one of the most important films of his career. In interviews, he has spoken about how personal the film was for him, not just as an actor, but as a filmmaker coming to terms with his own cinematic legacy. While he would go on to direct other acclaimed films, such as Mystic River, 2003, $1 Million Baby, 2004, and Gran Torino, 2008, Unforgiven remains the film that solidified his place as a true auteur. In the end, Unforgiven was more than just a great Western. It was a reckoning with the genre itself. It was a film that asked difficult questions about violence, morality, and redemption, and in doing so, it redefined what a Western could be. Through its unforgettable performances, its haunting cinematography, and its unflinching honesty, Unforgiven ensured that the myth of the gunslinger would never be seen the same way again.